So I guess, yeah, so my experience, I suppose, with maternity services started 5 years ago when I had my little boy. And my mental health prior to having a baby had always been absolutely fine. No issues at all. He was a planned baby, and we had a really easy pregnancy. Nothing went wrong. 10 days after his due date, I go into labour, and all was fine initially. However, the labour itself became long and complicated. It was a 46-hour labour, which ended in him having to be delivered by forceps in theatre. And I think from the moment he was born, I just knew that something didn't feel right. I suppose you see on the news all of these things about how it should be so amazing, and these parents that just cry with joy over their baby being born. And I just remember thinking that I didn't feel like that. I felt quite flat. I didn't really know what to feel. He was taken off me quite quickly, and I knew I hadn't seen him. And I remember thinking for ages that I hadn't seen his face, and I really didn't know what he looked like. And that felt really important to me, that I didn't know what my own child looked like, and other people did. And they were sort of over by the resuscitator working with him on what he and checking him over, and my husband was over with him. And I think it's really hard. I remember just thinking that I wanted my husband with me, and sort of why was everyone over with him and I'm on my own over here? And then you sort of berate yourself because you think, I should be selfless. This is my baby. I love this baby. I should be so pleased that everyone's over looking after him, and that that he's getting the help he needs. Why am I being so selfish that all I can think about is that I'm not, or that no one's with me? And it was very much, I suppose, this need to feel like an instant mum that I just did, that I just expected. I don't know, I suppose I wanted to feel that I had that protection for him, and I wanted that for him. And even now, I can still remember exactly how lonely I felt. The room was absolutely full of professionals, but I've never felt as lonely in my life as I did in that theatre room with all those professionals around me, because they were just not focused on me at all. And obviously when he was okay, he went out into recovery with my husband. For some reason, he wasn't given to me, and it was just a mistake. No one knows why. And afterwards they said it was a mistake. But so it's about half an hour later, once I'd been stitched up and things, that I actually met him. And I was holding him for the first time. We were having some skin to skin. And the midwife came over and just sort of snatched him back off me and said, you're going to the postnatal ward now anyway. You're not really holding him right. You're not supporting his neck enough. I'll just take him now. We'll put him in his cot and we'll wheel him through. And straight away, I just felt like the worst mum in the world, because I thought, do you know what? I've only been a mum half an hour, and I've held him for 5 minutes, and already they think I can't do it properly. They think I can't even hold him properly. And I think when you're really not well as well, like when you're feeling low, and hormones are obviously all over the place at this time anyway, at the best of times, it's really easy to take those comments personally, and to really sort of feel that everything is against you. Everything that you find, you hear, everything someone tells you becomes sort of another excuse as to why you're a bad mum, and another stick to beat yourself with, I suppose. And sort of we were in hospital for a couple of days. We went home, and I suppose we just sort of tried to get into feeding. We struggled with feeding. He had really bad bruises from the forceps. So I just could not get him latched on, and I would sort of call the midwives and ask for support, and they would give it, but the support was always around sort of just feed him more, just keep going. And for me, it was just sort of what does that mean? I thought, I want someone to just tell me what to do. What is feed him more? I'm feeding him as much as I think I need to. I don't think I can feed him anymore. And I just found the advice was never particularly clear, and it was never felt really helpful of what I needed. And then his weight dropped too much, and we were sent back over to the hospital. And when I went in, then it was the same thing. Everyone was so focused on his feeding. How can we get baby fed? How many meals can we express? How much can he have? And I think they made me prove I could express so many meals of breast milk before they would let me go home. And then they discharged me at something like 9 o'clock in the evening, because the Tesco closed at 10 p.m. and I could get a pump, so I could go home and pump. And feed him. And so I went home with this ridiculous plan that now feels ridiculous, but at the time I've been told to do it, so I just did it, whereby I had to breastfeed him, and then after I'd breastfed him, I had to express. I had to offer him an express bottle, then I had to express myself. So actually I spent 90% of the time just expressing and trying to feed this baby, and then he would sleep and I'd be expressing and getting milk prepared for the next time, and sterilising bottles and sterilising the express pump. And I just felt nobody at any point in that time asked me how I was. It was never about me as a mum. It was always about him. Is he getting enough milk? What is he doing? What's his weight doing? How is he doing? And I think sort of we did go home and we sort of gave this feeding a go, and we lived in this life for a couple of weeks. And I think every midwife I saw, I cried. I used to just want to go back to work. In my head, I had it, if I could just go back to work, then everything would be fine, because when I was working, I was in control of everything, and everything was, you know, I could do it. And I thought, I do not want to know what I'm doing here. And again, I kept going back for feeding support, and again, it's the same things. Just feed him more. You're doing, you know, you're doing okay. Feed him more. Feed him more. And I just think, what is feed him more? Like, this child is feeding all the time. How do I possibly feed him more? And it just felt so difficult. And then I was readmitted with sepsis, which I suppose was a good thing in the end, because we got in and we got support. And then I almost received that feeding support, I suppose, because I was back in hospital. And unfortunately, the sepsis affected the quality of my milk, so I ended up putting him on formula. But again, the whole concept of being on formula, I beat myself up about that, because I felt actually formula is not a good thing for babies. Everyone tells you breast is best, and if I can't even give my baby the best that I should be giving him, then what, you know, what's the point in me as a mum? How am I a good mum to him? And I think I just found it really difficult. And I remember being in hospital and sort of I'd cry for hours about the fact that I had to give him this formula. And then I was confused about how much formula I had to give him. And I went on the SMA website to try and look, because that was the bottles they'd given me in the hospital. And I had to actually tick a box on the SMA website before I could go in to say that I knew that breastfeeding was best for my child, but I still wanted to go into the website. And it just absolutely broke me. And I just thought the whole way everything was set up towards feeding was so hard. For mums that were struggling. And so the midwife obviously picked up that I was struggling, and they did suggest a referral to the perinatal team. But again, because I think people don't talk about how they're feeling, I just thought, well, I don't know any other mums that have seen the perinatal team. I don't know any other mums that have struggled with their mental health. It's just me. So I don't think I should see the perinatal team. You know, they'll think I'm mad. They'll think I'm a bad mum. They'll think that I'm not good enough. And I just said no. I think the first time I said no, I'm not that sort of person, which now seems absolutely bizarre, because what is that sort of person? But I just didn't really have any idea as to what it was. And I think in hindsight, I wish almost they'd said to me, actually, this is what the perinatal mental health team do. This is how these professionals can help you. This is how many parents actually find that they struggle and need support from these people. And I think eventually it got to the stage that because I didn't want to reach out and I really struggled with reaching out, I just became more and more unwell. And I think everyone expects you to enjoy it. So someone comes to visit the baby and they just say, oh, isn't it so amazing? And I think, at what point, if you're not a mum that's finding it amazing, how would you then turn around and say, no, I don't think it's amazing, actually? Because nobody's saying that to you. Everyone talks about how great it is, and you can just look and stare at them for hours. And it just isn't. If you don't feel that way, it's even harder. It's hard enough to reach out, I think, for mental health anyway. But I think when you're in sort of that postnatal period where everyone expects it to be such a happy time, it feels so much harder. And I became so well in the end that I literally ended up calling the perinatal team one day and just telling them I wanted to die, and they needed to sort it. And they quite quickly then put support in place to make sure I was safe. Which then meant I could get the support I needed, and I did accept the support and I did get better. But I think now it makes me really, really sad to think that I had to get to that stage before I actually felt able to reach out for that support, when so many mums struggle, and so many mums struggle in the same way I was. And I think it is a long journey, but you do get there. And then obviously, so 3.5 years later, I have my daughter. Completely different this time, because obviously I'd been well up until obviously I'd had her. So the support was put in place as a precaution antenatally. Antidepressants were rediscussed as something to go on in pregnancy closer to the time, so I was prepared. A team was in place to support me, because we all knew the likelihood of me becoming unwell again was much higher. And I did become unwell, but that support was there. And by this point, we had continuity of care in our local trust. And that just made an absolutely huge difference, because I think the first time round, I didn't have anyone that I could talk to, because I didn't have anyone that was sort of a real contact for me, or someone that I felt really comfortable with. Whereas I did here. So I had the same midwife every appointment, and I could see her, I could reach out to her. And so I did feel able to tell her if I was struggling. and to sort of reach out to her for support. And the continuity of care model, I mean, before I was never really knew much about it, but after I experienced it, I just thought it was the most incredible thing, because obviously I saw the same midwife the entire way through my pregnancy, but obviously they work in teams, so I'd met the other midwives in my team as such. And so when I was 39 weeks in sort of typical my luck fashion, my midwife went on annual leave, and so I actually, luckily, I had a midwife. I knew the midwives on the team. So the midwife who then did my sweep at 40 weeks and then saw me sort of my 41-week appointment was a midwife who I already had met a few times. And although she wasn't my midwife, I think the fact that they worked in a team together just made me feel that actually my midwife really trusts her. My midwife has said to me, all the people in my team, I trust them delivering my baby. I know them. And I just felt that if my midwife trusts these and I trust her, then I can trust these people too. And so, and I knew they had that team feel. I knew they all talked closely. So I knew they'd all know sort of the difficulties I'd had, and particularly with regards to the traumatic birth, the things I wanted to do. So when I went into labour then, obviously my midwife was still away, and I turned up at the birth centre, and it was this midwife who I'd seen 2 or 3 times before in the team. And I could have literally cried, because she came out to the door to meet me, and I just thought, oh my gosh, it's someone I know. It's actually someone I know. And I went in, and she'd obviously had discussions with my midwife. She knew all my notes, even down to little things. So when we went in, my waters are gone, and I went to get checked. And she said, I'm not going to examine you now, because if I do, it starts the clock ticking for an induction, and you don't want to go onto labour ward. We need to avoid that if we can for you. And she just knew what I wanted. And it just felt like such a continuation of my midwife, even though she wasn't there. And I had a lovely delivery in the birth centre, which I wouldn't have had if it hadn't been for her, and her fact she knew my background, because I was, by the time I was sort of fairly dilated, I was screaming and begging to take them to labour ward for an epidural, which I knew I didn't want, and I knew I'd have struggled with afterwards because of the trauma. So, and she really did help facilitate the birth that I wanted. And then when we sort of had our 3-day checkup at home, it was the same midwife again that came out to see me. And again, like the first couple, even though you just think things are going okay, when you go at home with this newborn baby, it's really difficult. And so to see her come to my house on day 3, and we could just again have that continuation and talk to her, was really nice and really helpful. And so that felt really nice. And then on the Monday morning, 2 days later, my midwife comes back from holiday, calls me up and says, oh, you've had a girl. She knew what had happened with the delivery. I didn't have to tell her anything. And then she arranged to see me to sort of talk through it all. And I think for me, it just made such a difference. And I think, if anything, the experience has taught me that I feel really passionate about now, about making sure that parents don't have to go through what I went through, and they have that support postnatally, and this postnatal support is what they need. And I think we just all need to be reaching out to those mums that are putting on a brave face and telling them, you know, they're not alone and that the support is there. That's it.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I'm privileged to know you, to be your friend. Thank you for helping the team in Southampton. I think to hear that powerful lived experience story, and you didn't even, to make you laugh, you didn't even mention that Julie accomplished more or less nearly as your midwife.
Because I'm a little bit crazy, obviously, and I'm known locally for just being crazy, because I just do so much to support parents. I'm everywhere. And there was a maternity stakeholder event, which I didn't want to miss. And they were opening the birth centre, and I had been on the design committee for the birth centre by pure fluke, because they'd recruited me at the time. And I'd been so involved, I did not want to miss the opening of this. And I was sort of 41 plus 3. And I was like, how wrong can it go? I'm in a room full of midwives, it'll be fine. And as I'm driving to this maternity stakeholder event, I'm contracting in the car, and I'm like, oh, as soon as I have the first contraction, I think, oh no, that is definitely a contraction. So I'm sat sort of on the next table to Julia Cumbridge, who would come to the maternity stakeholder event and then was going to open the birth centre, sort of monitoring my contractions on this phone. And then we sort of go over to the birth centre for the opening. I lose my mucus plug while we're there in the birth centre as I arrive. Get home and my waters go. Then I'm sort of back a few hours later to give birth there, but so she did, and the next day she did congratulate me on Twitter when she heard I'd had the baby.
So I don't know about only you could do that, Leanne, but that is the extent of Leanne's dedication to be literally going to a maternity engagement event and opening the birth centre as you are in labour. And yeah, it's amazing. So thanks very much, Leanne, and you know,